Assalamu alaikum students, how are you? I hope you're all fine. Alright, so students, today we are going to start, of course, the topic that we started in the last lecture. That was a very important element of this course, TEFL 2, that is micro-teaching, right? So in the last lecture we started talking of micro-teaching. What is micro-teaching? And I told you that we would talk about micro-teaching in 3 to 4 lectures. And today we are going to start our second lecture on micro-teaching, right? So as usual, what we do? Yes, first we review the previous lecture, all right? So this time we are going to review our lecture number 16. Why? Because today is lecture 17. Fine. So let's review briefly our lecture number 16 and then we will start new lecture. Today's lecture, that would be part 2 of our micro teaching. So dear students, yes, we talked about micro teaching, right, in general, but the way we started talking of, we talked about teaching. What is teaching, right? And we saw that it is not merely imparting knowledge to your students, right? And we also saw that it is not merely passing on your experiences to your students. And we also saw that it is not sharing your own experience to your students. So what is teaching then, right? So we discussed that understanding the nature of teaching, fine how we try to understand the nature of the teaching, in which we try to harmonize between what three elements, what the teacher, the subject matter, and the student. It is important. You can call it a triangle between teacher, the taught, the student, and what to teach. Clear? Mean the subject matter. What is to be taught? Fine. In short, the subject matter, the topic, the lesson that you are going to teach. Fine. Or you are going to present. And then you know your students, who are the learners. Fine. And then of course the one who teaches, so we call that person the teacher. So this is what the best approach to understanding the nature of teaching is, establishing a harmonious relationship between these 3 elements, right? So there should be harmony between what to teach, right? Who is your learner? And then of course, who teaches, right? What to teach, fine, and then whom to teach and who teaches. In short, this is what we say, that this is what the best approach to create harmony. Teaching is the activity of facilitating learning. We also saw that of course learner is important. And particularly for language teaching, learner must be given priority. Learner must be given due respect. Learner must be considered by the teacher. Why is it so? Because if the learner is put aside, if learner is not considered, so the purpose of this teaching, learning cannot be fulfilled, cannot be achieved. I hope you understand. So that's why the learner is equally important. Fine. Since the learner is important, so what we do? We try our level best to facilitate the learner in the best possible way. So learner, what? Felicitation. In fact, the learner facilitation is our goal. We try to facilitate the learner, and how we do it, this depends. Is that clear? It varies from teacher to teacher. Some teacher, what they do, they try their level best to facilitate their learner, right, in the best way. And how do they achieve it? They make good environment for it. Teaching environment is improved. And how can we improve teaching environment? Yes, of course, we see the place where you are teaching in a classroom environment, the classroom management, peripheral learning, realia in the class. Clear? Removing this communication gap between the learner and the teacher. So all these elements, my dear students, we keep in mind, right? We being TEFL student, in fact, when we teach language and we are learning how to teach language, so what we do, we in fact pave grounds for an ideal environment so that learner would learn, so that learner would achieve his purpose of learning, that why is he here. And similarly, if the environment is congenial, if the environment is learning environment, so the learning would be meaningful and teaching would also be meaningful. Teaching would be practical, right? So this is what we do, that whenever we teach, we need to consider the environment, the place where you are teaching, where you are imparting knowledge, where you are sharing your experience, where you are in fact you are creating harmony between the subject matter, student and the teacher, right? So effectiveness in teaching, again, it's a very good point that we saw in the last lecture. I hope you remember. We saw that, you see, I mean, if you are committed to teach well, your commitment makes you a good teacher. Age and gender and other factors, in this case, they are secondary. If you are not willing to be a good teacher, so even you are experienced, you may not be rated well. So again, your devotion, your loyalty to your profession, right? Your commitment level, your integrity. So all these factors, my dear students, make you good teacher, right? It is not only that with the age you will be good teacher. So how will you be good teacher? If you put efforts, if you hold yourself accountable after every lesson, right? If you keep your students in mind, if you try to create harmony, and if you learn from your experiences, right? So obviously you will be an effective teacher. So once you are effective teacher, so naturally teaching would be effective. So this is what you see, that I mean, how to be an effective teacher or how to achieve this effective teaching, these are some factors. One can become an effective teacher irrespective of her age, gender, experience. How he becomes, I talked about this, that you see, if you are loyal to your profession, and if you are teacher by choice, so you will be a great teacher, you will be a good teacher, and obviously teaching would be effective. So dear students, this is what we saw in the last lecture. I hope now things are clear in your mind. I hope you have overcome, in fact, any problems that you faced in the last lecture. Today, let's proceed, let's move on. What? The second part of our in micro-teaching. Today we'll be talking about, yes, that what is micro-teaching cycle? I mean, what is the procedure? What are the steps involved? I mean, what are the steps that make this cycle? Right? So you see on the screen there are 6 steps. Right? So step 1, what? That is lesson plan, very important. Right? We had a detailed discussion on lesson planning. We learned how to make a lesson plan. We talked about different elements of lesson plan. So first step in this micro-teaching cycle is your lesson plan, and that may take your time. Like the slide says, that may take you 2 hours, that may take you a day, right? And then of course teach. Whatever you have planned, you have prepared, what you do? Now is the time that you teach. Students, you understand? Are you with me? Yes. So how many steps are there? There are 6 steps. Step 1, lesson plan. Right? You know what is lesson plan? Yes. So that is a planning for teaching. What to teach? Clear? Right? Which language item to teach? Which language exponent to teach? Which activities can be used for it? So again, you can review the last lectures and see what happens in a lesson plan. Step 2, now it's a time for your teaching. It's a time for imparting. It's a time for sharing. It's a time for creating harmony. I hope you understand. And then of course the third step is feedback session. You take the feedback. Fine, because micro-teaching, of course, we'll talk about later, that well, your teaching is supervised. So once it is supervised, you get feedback and you improve accordingly. Then you replan. Of course, first you get feedback and then you replan. And then of course, next step is you reteach another group. Because after teaching one small group, you learn. Fine, and that learning, of course, helps you once you teach another group. I hope you understand. So that's why every group teaches you something. Every exercise in micro-teaching that you do, you learn. And of course, that's why, my dear students, that the micro-teaching is it's a training. Training for a teacher. Clear? In this training, of course, what happens that the teacher, of course, is supervised. We call it teacher-student. Why? Because the student is trying to be a language teacher. So also he is supervised. He is monitored. He is evaluated. Right? So after that small group of teaching, he or she is given feedback. So in the light of that feedback, of course, if that student teaches another group, so in this way what happens that you see he learns from his past experience and he tries to improve it. And again, of course, re-feedback. Right? I mean, the first feedback you receive, in the light of that feedback, what we do, we teach another group. And of course, now we teach another group, another feedback comes, so of course we learn. So of course this is a training, and by teaching, by doing, you learn. And again I go back to the lecture where we talked about using visuals, and we saw that when you hear, you learn. When you see, you hear, you learn. Fine, but when you see, you hear and you do, you learn 90%. I hope you understand. Right? These are the 5 steps, and of course time is given. Right? We'll talk about these steps one by one. Now, before we move on to these steps, you must know some characteristics of micro-teaching. Right? What are these? Characteristics of micro-teaching. Fine. We defined micro-teaching in the last lecture. If I review it for you, that in micro-teaching, what happens? It's a teaching at micro level. What makes it micro-teaching? Because you teach small group. Clear? You teach a small segment. Maybe you teach one skill. Right? So group is small, skill is one. And then you teach, of course, for 5 to 7 minutes. Micro-teaching. What are the characteristics of micro-teaching? So the first one is duration of teaching. As now, fine, this is one. The duration of teaching as well as number of students are less, like I told you. When the number of students, of course, is less, and also second thing is that, you see, of course, when you teach students, the strength is less. Next point is the content is divided into smaller units, which makes the teaching easier. Clear? I mean, when you integrate skills, so you are teaching more than one skill. But when you teach only one skill, so when you have taken one area, maybe you are teaching reading skills to a small number of group, right? So sometimes even you take one part of that reading skill. So this is one. Another characteristics of teaching, that we divide the content into units. First one is duration. Next point is only one teaching skill is considered at a time. In micro teaching, we teach one skill, for example. Clear? You may teach reading, writing, listening or speaking. So one skill at a time. There is a provision of immediate feedback. Of course, once you have this, you get the feedback. In micro teaching cycle, there is for facility of replanning, reteaching and re-evaluation. How it can be replanned, it's very simple. That once you teach a small group of people, you teach one skill, in fact, right? So, and in the light of that teaching, of course, you learn. And then you see how it can be improved. So replanning, reteaching and re-evaluation. It puts the teacher under the microscope, of course, because it is teacher-student. The one who wants to be a teacher, he teaches a skill and a supervisor supervises him. A supervisor sees him. What does he do? All the faults of the teacher are observed. How does he write on the board? How does he talk? How does he move? Clear? Right? So how does he start the lesson? Of course, I hope you understand. You see? So everything is evaluated. Every movement of a teacher is observed. That's why the teacher is what? Under microscope. Right? And if the evaluator is honest, so he evaluates each and every act of the teacher-student. I hope you understand. And next, of course, characteristics is the problem of discipline can also be controlled. Yes, very simple. If I ask you how it can be controlled, can you answer this question? Yes, try. Umar, can you try? No? Zishan, could you try? Well, because we have a small group. Good. Yes. Uzma, can you try? Because we are teaching one skill. Yes, very good again. Anybody else? Third thing? Azmat? No? Yes? Zulifkar, what do you say? Alright, fine. Good. So, we teach a small number of people. We teach one skill, and then we teach for a short span of time. We teach for 7 to 8 minutes, 10 minutes. Good. Right. So, that's why discipline can be maintained. Vis-a-vis, if you compare it with a large number of students, and where you are integrating skills, so things cannot be maintained, discipline cannot be observed. However, if you are having a small number of students, and then you are teaching one skill or a sub skill, and then you are teaching for 10 minutes, so chances are there that you can have what? Discipline. Now, here is next slide is that comparison between micro teaching and traditional teaching. Clear? That is it the same, or we need to know what are the comparison. We compare between traditional teaching and micro teaching. So student, the first, on one side you have traditional teaching, and the other hand we have micro teaching. The first point, if you see on the slide, that class consists of 40 to 60 students. Very common thing. In traditional teaching, you might have seen classes of 40 students, 45 students, 60 students. And even in some institutions, in public sector institutions, more than 60 also sit in the class. Right? So strength is the first point. If you compare traditional teaching with micro teaching, so strength is the first factor. In traditional teaching, strength is more students sit in the class. Micro teaching, yes, it's a micro level, small number of students. A small group, maybe 10 students, 15 students maximum. Clear? So that's why we say for micro teaching, we should have less number of students. Slide says 6 to 10 students. The teacher practices several skills at a time. Next point is that in traditional teaching, teacher talks. Is that clear? Speaking. Teacher writes, writing. Students think, write, discuss. So there is an integration of skills. There is what? Integration of skills. Skills are integrated. I hope you understand. So this is what the point is. Whereas in micro teaching, no, teacher takes up one skill at a time. One skill at a time. Micro teaching. Clear? Third point is duration. Strength, first point. Next point, integration. Third is duration of class is maybe 40 to 45 minutes, whereas duration in micro teaching is just 5 to 7 minutes generally, in fact. It may be 10 to 15 minutes, but if you compare these two, there is a difference, right? The third thing is, the next point is, immediate feedback is not available. In traditional teaching, you cannot have quick feedback, right? And even the feedback comes sometimes, because nobody is there to evaluate you. Whereas in micro teaching, yes, there is immediate feedback because you are teacher, student, you teach under the supervision of somebody, and that somebody, of course, monitors you, he evaluates you, and then he gives the feedback. I hope you understand. Clear? Now the next point is that there is no control over the situation. A big class having 40 to 60 students, and the time is 40 to 45 minutes, you cannot have proper control. Whereas in micro teaching, yes, teaching is carried out under controlled situation, and it's quite common. It's self-explanatory that once the number of students, of course, is 7, time is 10 minutes, and of course teaching one skill, things can be controlled. Teaching becomes complex. Traditional teaching is complex. Micro teaching is relatively simple. Why it is complex? Yes, very simple. You can say that, well, you are integrating skills, and if you are moving from one skill to another, fine. Moving from speaking to reading, reading to writing, again writing to listening. So it goes on. That may make this teaching complex, because you have to finish it in that allocated time. I hope you understand. Are you with me? Fine. So on the other side, teaching is relatively simple in what we call it micro-teaching. The role of a supervisor is vague. I mean, because there is no evaluator. In traditional teaching, yes, the students evaluate, and sometimes students do not have that freedom of expression. Particularly in the public sector, there is no check and balance. Students even raise fingers, they raise voices, nobody cares. However, in private sector, if majority has a problem, they might raise finger. And even if you see that, of course, even in the private sector, I mean, it is very, very rare that, of course, the management changes the teacher. In public sector, of course, it is next to impossible. Clear? So this is what we call it that role of a supervisor is vague and the role of supervisor is specific and well defined to improve teaching, because there is somebody who evaluates you, right? And the next one is the pattern of classroom interaction cannot be studied, whereas in micro teaching the pattern of classroom interaction can be studied objectively, right? That how the teacher begins, how the teacher starts his lesson, how the teacher makes his students practice, how the teacher helps students produce, so all the stages. Whereas in traditional teaching, you might have seen that, well, there is no pattern, of course. Sometimes the teacher comes and he writes on the board. Sometimes he comes and asks students to speak, so there is no pattern. These are, of course, some of the, what we call them, you compare the comparison between micro teaching and traditional teaching. Now, dear students, components of micro teaching techniques. What are the components of what micro teaching techniques? The first component, my dear students, student teacher, right? It is self-explanatory that, see, the student is a trainee. He learns how to be a teacher. So we call it student teacher. Right? The student who gets the training of a teacher is said to be student teacher. A student, for example, now you are micro teaching student. You are student of TEFL, right? So what do? You learn. You are a student to be teacher of foreign language. So you are what? Student teacher. It's a training. Right? You are trying to be good language teacher. So who are you? You are student teacher. You are learning how to teach a foreign language. I hope you understand. So various, of course, capacities are developed in them during training, such as what? Capacity of a class management, capacity of maintaining discipline, and capacity of organizing various programs of the school or college, etc. This is what the first component. Second one is feedback devices. So second component of micro teaching is that there are some feedback devices. Providing feedback is essential to make changes in the behavior of the pupil. I mean, the one who is teaching, one who is having micro teaching, and if we provide him feedback, that feedback improves the person, right? So the micro teacher should be provided with feedback. And who provides the feedback? Of course, the supervisor. Of course, the one who is evaluating him objectively. He comes forward, he gives him feedback, and this feedback can be in writing, this feedback can be orally. I hope you understand. So, oral feedback and written feedback, yes, it makes the difference. And if that, of course, the student teacher intends to learn, he wants to be a good language teacher, he takes that feedback positively. right? And he tries to incorporate that feedback in his future teaching. Otherwise, if he makes a mistake, and these mistakes will go on. Like generally, of course, if you see that people who apply for the teaching jobs, and you see they have got a degree and they get job, and if there is no training, what happens? They would follow the pattern, the way they were taught, and of course their teacher might not have been trained. Right? So a mistake goes on, it multiplies. That's why, my dear students, that the feedback given to the student teacher makes the difference. I hope you understand. A third thing is, third component, of course, skills. I mean, as we know that what does skill mean? Ability to do something well, or what we call it, expertness component. But teaching skill, yes, is a set of teacher behavior which are specially effective in bringing about what? The desired changes in pupil. For example, lecturing skills. How to lecture, if it is only the lecturing skills. How to talk. When to take pauses, right? So, what should be your volume, speed, rate of words, etc. Then, of course, blackboard writing, whiteboard writing, PPT making, OHP, slides, transparencies making. So all these factors. Skills of asking questions. Skills of classroom management, again, all these things are there. So, my dear students, these are components of what? Micro-teaching. How many components? First, student-teacher, right? Second, what? Skills. Third, teaching skills. And then, of course, feedback devices. Well, students, so these are some of the components of micro-teaching. The first component I told you, what? Student teacher. Second, feedback devices. Third one, skills. And fourth one, teaching skills. Now here, of course, skills of micro teaching. What are various skills of micro teaching? Now students, see, there are 6 areas. How many? 6. First one, introduction skill, very important. Right? That how to introduce, again it's a skill, introduction skills. Well, students, so introduction skill. Next one, skills of probing questions, probe. Right? Third one is skills of explanation, skills of stimulus variation, skills of blackboard writing, and then skills of what? Achieving closure, how to close. We'll be talking about these skills in today's lecture, and of course in the next lecture as well. These are the 6 types of skills, right? And we call them skills of micro teaching. Before that, we talked about components of micro teaching. Now what are the skills, right? So, and here again, introduction skills, skills of probing questions, skills of explanation, skills of stimulus variation, skills of feedback writing, skills of blackboard writing, skills of achieving closure. These are some of the skills. 6 types of skills are there. Let's talk about these skills one by one. So first one is introduction skill, right? From the word introduce. Right? So what are the skills particularly for introduction? The skill of introducing a lesson involves establishing rapport with the learners. Clear? Promoting their attentions and exposing them to essential contents. These are what we call them introduction skill. I hope you understand. Right? What is it? Skills of introducing a lesson, right? Or you may link it with what? A warm-up. But warm-up, even see a stage before that, right? So in the introduction skills, you introduce that lesson to your learners. What you do? You establish rapport with the learners, promoting their attention, right? And how you do it, yes, it depends. It varies from teacher to teacher, in fact. What are the components of introduction skill? First, preliminary attention gaining. What you do? You gain attention, right? And how you get attention? Which grabbers you use for it? Yes, you may use a quotation, you may use a joke, fine, or you may use a startling fact, or you may give your opinion, fine. So, but the purpose is to gain attention of the audience. Who are your audience? Your students. You have to grab their attention. You have to get their attention. Why again? Because once you get their attention, students, in fact, they find things easy for them and they learn well. Because our purpose again is to facilitate the learner. Right? So, learner, of course, felicitation. Learner's facilitation is a must. And for that, you think of as many moves as you can. You think of as many measures as you can. Of course, you think of some practical measures. I hope you understand. Right? So, this is what we call it, preliminary attention gaining. Normally, of course, at the beginning of a lesson, what we do, students are found not to be attentive. We have to get the attention of course, the student. And here I would say that, of course, knowing the psychology of the learner. That's why a teacher should also be a psychologist. Right? Because reading the faces of the students, teacher can decide on. And particularly when it is the classes in the afternoon, classes of adults, or classes that you take in the evening. Naturally, of course, if you are teaching adults, so over there you need to change your teaching strategies. Why is it so, my dear students? Because teaching at that, of course, level, when you are dealing with adults or you are teaching in the evening, yes, because students, they come from their offices, they are tired, so they may not have attention that you expect from them. But in the morning, yes, students come fresh, right? So they have a sound sleep. Exceptions are there, that some students work at night and they come in the morning. Yes, but there are, of course, very, very few students are there of that category. Generally, of course, we talk about in our culture, so what happens? Students come fresh in the class. The first two classes, they really, really enjoy. Like teachers, of course. You being teachers, you enjoy teaching. Fine? Because it's a beginning, it's a first class. Of course, the second class. However, the third and fourth classes, at times the teacher gets tired. And even the teacher has not taken the first two, maybe he was free at that day. Sometimes it happens that, of course, you have a free slot first and the free slot second, and then you have to teach in the third and fourth slot. It becomes a bit difficult for you. Right? So, dear students, of course, when you teach, in fact, your students, so you have to keep in mind the time factor as well. Right? That's why, of course, introduction skills are important. I hope you understand. So, preparing the minds for learning is a must. Teacher can do it by telling them a story, anecdotes. A relevant story can be told, can be used. I hope you understand. So, a good story, if you make it relevant, first of all, a sensible, relevant, understandable, meaningful story can make the difference. Right? This is what you have to keep in mind. And again, your demonstration, recitation. So all these factors are important, and the way you come in the class. Next, of course, talking about introduction skill is use of previous knowledge. When you link, right, this present introduction with the last one, so there is a link. So what you can use what? The previous knowledge refers to the learner's level of achievement before instructions. Instruction begins. Clear? Use of previous knowledge is a must because it helps to establish an integration between the pre-existing knowledge of the learner and the new knowledge that the learner wants to impart. This is what we do. Use of previous knowledge. Right? Because whatever you have taught in the last lecture, and then of course you pick up the thread and you link it with the present one, again it would create harmony. It would create a link between the previous and the past and the present, and that would definitely help you in your teaching. Use of appropriate device, right? In order to motivate the learner, the teacher could use appropriate use of devices or techniques with introducing a lesson. For example, a picture can be shown. Clear? So, of course, that device can help in the introduction skills. Link with the new topic. Yes, of course, like whatever device you are using, you have to create a link with the topic that you are going to talk about now. So, dear students, these are some factors. Clear? Skills of micro teaching. First one, I told you that what you do here, simple. Attention, you have to gain attention. Previous knowledge, appropriate device, and all that. There are some examples also. Right? Why we need examples, my dear students? Examples make things easy for the students to understand. Examples help teachers to explain the concept. So examples have many purposes. They are useful for the teacher and they are equally useful for the learner. Examples, because again examples explain things. And once you explain things, what happens? Students get more. They get themselves involved in that activity. The teacher, of course, if the teacher has good examples, so he can deliver, he can talk about that area. He can talk about that concept in a better way. Fine? So that's why, my dear students, when you being a teacher of the foreign language, so when you go to the class, you have to have examples. And where to find examples? Of course, right now you have access to technology, you have access to media, right? You have access to, of course, social media, electronic media, press media, interaction, of course. So when you interact, you get to know about examples. And really, examples are amongst the best sources of explanation, right? Because when you explain things and you give example, at times while teaching, you understand that this example suits here. Sometimes you think of an example and when you use that example you feel does not work in the class. Or example, sometimes you have a joke. So maybe when you share the joke in the class, you feel that the joke didn't work. So this is what you have to keep in mind. There are some examples. See, example is there. The dash surgeon was dash dash to perform operation because he had dash dash. You see, now there are instructions. Use one word of 7 letters for first blank. Then split the same word into 2 different words and filled in 2 blanks. And don't change sequence of letters. Can you think of? Yes? 2. You have to think of a word of 7 letters. And you have to put that word in the first blank. Then you have to split that word into 2 and put in the remaining second and third blank. Clear? And then of course you need not to change the sequence of that word. So can you try? I'll help you. the dash surgeon, for example, the notable surgeon, N-O-T-A-B-L-E. The notable surgeon was dash dash to perform operation. Try, here you are. The notable surgeon was not able, see, not able, split, to perform operation because he had no table. Again, no table. I hope you understand. So exam, this is an example of introduction skill. Right? Another example, golden jubilee plus today's date minus silver jubilee equals to what? Golden jubilee, yes, how many years? 50, alright, plus today's date. Today is what? So today is 4th, for example. So 50 plus 4, 54, minus silver jubilee. What is silver jubilee now? 25. Is that clear? So 50 plus 4, 54, minus 25. The answer is 29. An algebraic example. Right? So here the students come to know what is a golden jubilee, diamond jubilee. Is that clear? Silver jubilee. And then today's date plus you have to add. And you have to minus again silver jubilee and equals to get an answer. So once you do it, you will find, you will see all eyes on you. You will get maximum attention of the audience, and sometime, of course, you can write a quotation on the board. And once you write a quotation, even it gets the attention of the audience. And again, this quotation can be from an international media, of course. Right? You can think of a quotation. An example, Children's Day divided by Valentine's Day plus Independence Day. Again, Children's Day. Which day? 1st June or November 20th? Plus Valentine's Day, 14th February. Right? Fine. Divided by Valentine's Day. Example, 20 divided by 14. Get the answer. Add Independence Day. Say, example, 14th August. I hope you understand. 20 divided by 14, answer could be 1 point something. Plus 14th August, could be 15 point something. I hope you understand. Like here example in front of you, that Children's Day, and then of course other information is there. A third example, heads of raven. There are 7 heads in fact. You will read about ravens. Plus palms of human body. Palms. How many palms? 1, 2. Minus Republic Day. Again an answer. So these are the examples of what, my dear students? Which examples? Introduction skills. An example, eyes plus nose minus ears. Eyes, 2 eyes. Plus nose, 1, 3. Minus ears, 2. Right? So 2 eyes plus 1 nose. 3 minus 2 ears. 1 plus teeth, 32. 33 minus hands, 31. Divided by tongue, 1. Answer is 31. So body parts are there in fact. And then these operations, plus, add, minus, divided. I hope you understand. So these are some of the examples that we can use on introduction skills. So dear students, these are what the point was, that today what we talked about in this lecture, if I give you summary of that it was the second part on your micro teaching. So what did we do in this lecture? That first of all, we saw how many steps are there. Fine? And we saw that there are 6 steps of this micro teaching cycle. And I also given you the time for it. Right? So first of all, we talked about micro lesson plan. Right? Now you know it very well what is a lesson plan in fact. Clear? So the planning for your specific lesson. And I am sure you people know that how we make a good lesson plan. right? And of course, you know that you need to know the objectives, the aims of that lesson. And I am optimistic, you know that we need to keep in mind who are our learners. What is their assumed knowledge? Right? So what would be in the presentation stage? What would be in the practice stage? What would be in the production stage? And how to give them homework. Right? And then of course mean teaching. What you do? You teach, in fact. Right? So in teaching, how you use teaching aids. How you teach well. How you keep your thought in mind. How you keep your students in mind. How to make teaching effective and how to make environment conducive for learning. Clear? So, I mean, the teaching is not that you just share information. You pass on information and you forget learners. So you keep the learners in mind. Right? So keeping the learners in mind means their level of understanding, their age, their in fact positions, their background, whatever you could know about your learner helps you in your teaching. It improves your teaching, in fact. Because professionally, when you start teaching, you get to know your students, you get to know their culture and everything, and that knowing of the students, of your learners would help you, in fact. I hope you understand. Important. Then, my dear students, of course, feedback sessions are also important. You get feedback. It's very important. Why? Because feedback in micro-teaching improves of course, student-teacher. Right? Who is a student-teacher? Of course, the one who is training, one who is under training to be a teacher. The one who teaches a small group, one who teaches one skill, and one who teaches for 10 minutes. And this feedback, in fact, helps him. How to improve his teaching of that skill. That helps him how to teach the future lesson in the light of the feedback. And of course, in the micro-teaching, you are supervised. Somebody is there to supervise you objectively. Somebody is there to see you what you do in that teaching. And once you are supervised, once you are evaluated, so obviously that is in your benefit. Because you are going to be the future teacher. So that teaching would be improved if somebody gives you feedback. And if there is nobody, for example, to give you feedback, what would you do? I mean, it would be difficult for you, right? Because if there is a mistake in your teaching, for example, if you are unable to use board in the best way, if you are unable to use the board rightly, what would you do? You would keep on. I mean, I have seen many the teachers, once they stand near the dais, they don't know how to stand, in fact. And why? It is not their fault. Why? Because, of course, they have never been taught, they have never been trained how to use dice. So, the way they come and the way they start using their dice in the very first day, then it goes on with that. Right? Similarly, these teachers are not trained how to use board. So, what they do? When they write on the board, they write diagonally. Or they write on the extreme corners, left or right. So here, of course, my dear students, if you could improve your writing skills, right, particularly if you have some basic calligraphy, so that really helps you. Clear? You may not have good handwriting, I understand, right? But the point is that you can improve it, you can work on it. Right? So this way, of course, or how to stand in front of the class, again some teachers don't know it. They bend their leg. I have seen many teachers, what they do? They bend their legs, in fact. And at the back wall, of course, you can see the imprints of their feet, the shoes, mud on the wall. Of course it happens. See, because it is not their fault, because the system has not provided them training that how to face the class, where to stand, when to talk, when not to interrupt, when to ask question, when to let the of course student express themselves. So these things have not been given to them. So ultimately, they stick to it, they follow this practice, and it goes on. They never try to improve. And if you train them after their 20 years of services, it's difficult that they would change. So therefore, of course, the feedback in the micro-teaching, the benefit of micro-teaching is that, of course, you get to know your grey areas, your weak areas. And then, of course, you are a student teacher, so obviously you learn with the passage of time, right? And of course, that feedback helps you to replan your lesson. Replan your teaching. You redo things because it's a small group. It's a training. Right? So if you redo, you improve. Again, there is a feedback. You redo and you improve. So this continuous teaching, the feedback obviously improves. Clear? So of course, my dear students, these are what the 6 steps are there. That reteach another group. That also improves. And of course re-feedback, and that improves. So micro-teaching, of course, is a teaching at micro level, right? Where you are under the microscope, you being teacher, you are under the microscope, you are supervised objectively, and you try to, in fact, keep the components of micro-teaching in your mind. You try to incorporate the skills that you have learned or you are learning of micro-teaching. Example, your teaching skills are important, your feedback is important, and how you present things is important, how you get the attention of the audience is important, how, you introduce things, introduction skills, right? So, we have started the skills of micro-teaching, and of course the first skill was introduction skills. That what you do in the introduction skills. Right? That I gave you examples of that, maybe some algebraic examples I have given you. You can think of your own examples. You can think of how to introduce things. And why we are focusing on this, my dear students, that preparing the minds, preparing the learner for learning is important. If the learner has not been prepared, no matter what you teach, that may not be fruitful. Right? So creating that environment useful, the teacher does his job well. The learner, of course, needs to be, right, facilitated. He needs facilitation, right? And his facilitation, of course, helps teaching learning process better. Right? So it's of course, again, the triangle, that was the subject matter, the student, and what the teacher. So these are what some steps are there of this micro teaching cycle, and then we talked about introduction skills. Now you have got 2 minutes. If you have any question, you can ask. Yes, Azmat, any question? You have a question? What's the question? Why do we need micro teaching? Okay, good question, Azmat. Again, you can see we have talked about this area, but since you have asked question, so why we need it? Because we are student teacher. We are trying to be language teachers, and you can never be a good language teacher unless you have a training. So it's a training. And since we train our learner at micro level, right? Because he is given a small group of people. And he teaches one skill at a time. And he teaches only for 10 minutes because we have to give time to all learners, a class of 15 students. So that's why, of course, we need it. And why? Because we give feedback after this micro teaching, and that feedback really improves. So that's why micro teaching is important for the students of TEFL. Any other question? No question. So students, it's a time to say goodbye. See you in the next class.